So we are talking about low vision computer setups today, and I'm hoping that we'll have some time at the end of this um, to do some questions. This is probably the longest doc I've put together for a tech time. It's really long. So my plan for today is I'm going to kind of go through all the Windows low vision settings. And then for Mac and Chromebook, I'm just going to kind of talk about what is different or unique about the settings on those devices. So we're not going to go through all 22 pages of this. Um, and hopefully that will leave us with some time. I am bad at kind of running up against my time limit every time. All right, so in the chat, I'm putting the link to our document for today. I see a bunch of people already in there. And I guess let's go ahead and talk about this. Quick overview. If you haven't been using a lot of my documents in the past, I tend to put a table of contents at the very beginning of my document. So these are all hyperlinks to sections within the document. So if you're trying to set up a Mac computer, you can jump straight to the Mac section. And you don't have to kind of bother working all your way through down to the bottom here. So this first section at the top is just links to get you through the document quickly and give you an idea of what's in here. As I said, this is probably the longest document I put together for Tech Time. My kind of hope for this is not that everyone sits down and reads every word of this, but as you're kind of going to set up a computer the next time, you can jump to that section and just read what you need for that. As I was researching this, it kind of confirmed for me that doing these low vision computer setups is more confusing than it needs to be. There are just lots of settings and things that you can tweak and probably should tweak, but they're all hidden in different parts, and that's true for Windows and Chromebook and Mac. So I think this document is going to be helpful for me the next time I have to talk someone through it, and hopefully it's helpful for you. All right, that's my introduction. I think that pretty much covers this top paragraph here. Before we dig into specific devices, we'll talk a little bit about common settings. So pretty much when we're any device we're working on, some of the settings we're going to be looking at is the display scale or how big that controls how big everything displays on your screen. So on all the devices, you can adjust that and kind of make everything bigger on your screen. So that's one of the first things. I saw a really great tip for changing your desktop background. A lot of times, I know Chrome and Mac in particular have these really pretty images for their backgrounds, and that can be a little overwhelming and it can make it sort of hard to see some low contrast. So I saw some great tips for just changing your background to like a blank color. We'll go over how to do that. You can always adjust your text size on any device, and where to find that kind of varies. So we'll cover that. Cursor adjustments, making your mouse a custom color or making it larger or enabling some settings that make it easier to track. It's really common now that devices also have color adjustments. So invert colors is something that's been around for a long time on most devices. But in the last couple of years, we're starting to see lots of like color blindness adjustments that you can utilize. So we'll see some of those today. And then some additional colors. Like Mac has like a filter that you can put over your whole screen that some students like. So those are the kind of core settings we're going to be looking at adjusting. And then there's some additional stuff that varies from device to device. And then in addition to these things, I guess I'll say for some students, you might find that kind of tweaking this group of settings here might be enough that you don't necessarily need to be using something like a magnifier. So I think it's always kind of a good idea to be aware of these things and to maybe check them out, particularly if they're kind of on the lower end. of low vision where their vision isn't really significantly impacted. But moving beyond those settings, for students who do need some additional magnification, magnifiers are standard at this point. They're built into everything, so we'll learn where to access those. And then for low vision students, I'm always thinking about text to speech. So something that your students can use to give their eyes a break, particularly when they're getting into higher grades or they're looking at transition, when there's lots of reading you need to be doing in college. If you're not feeling up to sitting and reading for 2 or 3 hours at a time, having some familiarity with text to speech, I think, is really beneficial. So we'll talk about those settings on the different devices today. And then something I won't get into too much is that in the browser, you can always zoom. I think we know the control plus, control minus to zoom in and out. You'll see that in all the materials for today, I'm using control plus equals just because it looks weird when you write control plus plus. And I guess in actuality, you are really using equals, but that's the same thing as saying control plus. So hopefully that's not too confusing for folks. There is one other thing I should mention here is when we're thinking about text size and adjusting text size, that's one of the first things a lot of teams think of and that they go and tweak. And there are some limitations to that. So I've seen this like several times across lots of devices. There's kind of a point where you blow up the text size so big that it starts displaying really funny. And you'll have issues with labels overlapping each other or labels getting cut off. So that's something to keep an eye out for as you're adjusting the text size on the devices you're working with. And if you are hitting that point, where you feel like you need the text size to be so large that it ends up creating these display issues, it may be time to seriously consider looking at a magnifier. Last caveat, I guess, for today before we really dig into things is when we get into Windows, I am not going to be talking about Zoom Text or Fusion today, but we are going to be talking about the Windows magnifier. Zoom Text is, as I've kind of gotten more familiar with it over the last few years, is a very bulky program. It's really demanding on your computer, and it can bog a lot of things down. It can be kind of tricky to work with. Whereas I think a lot of our students don't quite need all of the robust things that are in Zoom Text. So I think magnifier is a really cool option. And the other benefit to that is when you're kind of getting used to working with magnifier, it's something you can kind of walk up to any Windows computer and just turn it on, as opposed to Zoom Text. So that's my last caveat today. I'm not going to be talking about Zoom Text except for that. All right. So screen size, this is something we have to consider for every device, particularly if we have our hands in the kind of purchasing process. Um, for a lot of students, larger screens can be really helpful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always the case. You should be considering your students' vision, like if they have field loss. One of the people I referenced a lot for this presentation, he's using a 40-inch monitor, which works great for him, may not work well for all of our students, particularly those with something like a field loss. So consider your students' visual needs, how they like to work, what their environment's like when you're thinking about screen size for your students. And there is an article by Ali Fuddy. She's a caddis in Vermont. And she wrote this great article for Perkins about Chromebooks and low vision. And one of the arguments she makes in this article is that the biggest screen size, the biggest I've seen for Chromebook is like 16, 17 inch. They get pretty big. The biggest screen size isn't always the most beneficial if you can access some other features on a smaller screen size. So in particular, she points out like touch screens. She really likes providing touch screens to students, and that pinch zoom is really convenient, as well as foldable devices. And one of the big perks of foldable devices is one, you can use them kind of a bit like a tablet, so they can support handwriting a little better. but also they're easier to position closer to the face. And Joe DeLugo, when we were in Bend a couple years ago, um, did a cool session based on some of Ali's work. Let's see if I can get this to open. There we go. And Joe included a bunch of cool illustrations that I really liked. So I'm scrolling through the document here, and here we are. These kind of simple illustrations of students hunching over their desk, as opposed to if you can get a device that's foldable, like the one that's shown here, you can position the device closer to the student and kind of relieve that need to bend over and get so close to that device just to have that access you're looking for. So I've always thought that's really interesting. I think that's something we should be considering, the ergonomics and the positioning of this. So reasons to kind of think critically about screen size beyond just getting the biggest one you can find. All right. And then finally, magnifiers. We're going to look at magnifiers on all the different devices. They are largely the same from device to device. Um, I want to kind of give a brief overview of kind of what's out there. Typically, when you're working with a magnifier, they will typically provide three views for you. So one is a full screen magnification where your whole screen becomes magnified. And that means at any point as you're working on your screen, you are not seeing the entire screen. You're just seeing that magnified area. So that works good for some folks. There are a couple other options that let you have a smaller magnified area, but you also get kind of the full picture of your screen at the same time. So those would be a lens magnifier, or on Mac, they call it picture in picture. That's where you get like a little square and it will follow your mouse around the screen. So you get that magnified view kind of right where you're focused, but you still can get, you have a better sense of the full screen layout. And docked would be the other version of that. So the lens or the picture in picture is following your mouse around. A docked magnifier lives at one point on your screen. So most of the time it's on the top or it's on the bottom, and it's just a big bar. And as your mouse moves around the screen, that magnified view is following where your mouse is going. You're still getting that full picture of what's happening on the screen, the big picture, but you're getting this magnified view in a static location, so it's not changing the way lens or picture in picture is. Okay, so I think that's all the kind of prerequisite stuff. We're going to look at the Windows settings and tools, and then from there, we're just going to talk about what's different. Okay, so the easiest way to pull this up is to just tap the Windows key on your keyboard and then type in settings. And this is how I launch pretty much everything. Um, we are going to need to see this so I can follow my own directions. Okay, so once you have this up, we're just going to work. So we're going to start in system settings, and we're going to go into display, just the size of everything on your computer. And on Windows, you'll always see that there's going to be some recommended scale. And that's what I have mine set to. I'm going to try and bump this up. I'm not sure if it's going to change on your end. But let's go to the biggest one. And we'll see if this changes the display on your side at all. Doesn't look like it, but I see on my side things getting a lot bigger. So that's an easy one to make absolutely everything on your screen bigger. Not a whole lot of thought or trials to go into this one. Makes everything bigger. A lot of people, I didn't include this in my presentation document, but a lot of people also say you can play with this display resolution. I didn't include this because if you don't get the number right here, things will appear stretched in weird ways. So we're going to avoid that. You can play with it if you want, but we're not going to get into that today. All right. So scale's the big one here under system settings. We're going to jump back out and go to personalization and talk a bit about color. So under background is where we can change some of our desktop stuff. I have my desktop set to display a bunch of images, but if you jump down to the bottom here, well, actually I think up at the top, you can choose whether you're displaying a slideshow like me or a picture or a solid color. And the solid color or a picture I think is a really good choice for us to have a really simple, clean background that we know is going to be high contrast. So if I change mine to a solid color now, my desktop's going to be totally black in the background, super easy to see things that are kind of against that black backdrop. Okay, so that is one thing to look out for here. You can also choose these colors for your background, and I think there's some custom colors that are also for your background. Okay. The next, I was getting a little confused because the next thing I want to look at in personalization is colors specifically. So this is where the light mode, dark mode lives. I like to keep my devices all in dark mode as opposed to light mode. This window is going to get very bright. And I think the custom setting just lets you kind of choose some things that are in light mode, some things that are in dark mode. You may also want to try turning off transparency effects. This is a big deal on the Macs with the latest operating system update. But having transparency effects turned on can kind of ruin some of your high contrast setup. So if in particular, if you're really going for high contrast, you might want to turn off all the transparency stuff you find. You can choose an accent color that works best for you. This is going to show up in all the menus and things you're working through. And I think that is it for personalization. All right. The bulk of the remaining settings are going to be under accessibility. So we're going to spend a good amount of time in here. And you can see the very first one on the list here is text size. That's a big one for us. This is pretty simple. There's just a slider here. You can drag this slider to find the text size that is best for you, and you can hit apply. It'll apply it to everything in the system. So this is system-wide, all the text you come across. Again, keep in mind, watch your display, see if it causes any display issues with things running over or overlapping, and consider whether or not you need to be moving to a magnifier. But this would be the best place to adjust your text size. All right, jumping back out to accessibility, we're going to look at visual effects. Again, transparency effects are here. So there's some other transparency settings that might not be caught in that last one we looked at. So you may want to turn those off if you're going for high contrast. I saw some folks recommending this always show scroll bars. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Let's see, I have it turned on. Let's see if we can find an example of this. So if I have it turned off, there's a scroll bar here at the edge of the window, but it's hidden until you kind of hover over it. So if your students are having a hard time finding those kinds of things, you may want to turn on this always show scroll bar so it's just kind of always present. All right. Next up in the accessibility menu, we're going to look at mouse pointer. This is always a popular one, something we should probably be looking at for all of our students. I'll let Brooke in. So there's a few basic styles here. There's a white with a black border, a black with a white border. There's a custom color. And then this third option is inverted. So when you have the inverted option selected, I'll make it bigger so it's easier to see. It will invert the color of anything that's underneath your mouse pointer. So if your student's having a hard time tracking their cursor, particularly if it's kind of routinely getting lost against some background color, inverted might be a good choice for them. Or maybe choosing a custom color might do that. So choosing a pointer style that works for you, choosing a size that works for you, can make a pretty big difference. There is a similar thing now for the text cursor. So I'm jumping back out to accessibility. We'll go to text cursor. So Windows now has a text cursor, which will add these little indicators on the top and bottom of your text cursor. You can choose a custom color. You can choose how big that text cursor is. It gets pretty big, and as you can see in the preview, it can start to kind of overlap nearby lines. But if your student's always losing their cursor, it may be worth turning that on. It may take some getting used to, similar to this other cursor setting, which is thickness. Um, these are, I don't think Chrome and Mac had a similar one. This seems like a Windows only thing. Cursor thickness is interesting. I'm going to drag the slider all the way up so you can see what it does in that little preview window above. You can see that it gets really thick, but it starts to cover up several characters. So this will help with visibility of that text cursor, but it's also probably going to take some getting used um, to kind of keep track of where that cursor is really lined up when it starts to overlap with several characters. But that's there should your student need it. All right, couple more things to check out here, and then we're just into bonus round for settings. All right, we're going to skip magnifier because we're going to look at it under tools, color filters. So I mentioned this at the top. We're starting to see a lot of like color blindness supports in color filters. So we have some options here. I don't know if you all can see my display, but my colors are inverted right now. I look like a weird ghost in my video preview. There's also a grayscale inverted, a regular grayscale, and then we'll see some of these color blindness options. So this is where green is weak. And I think this is meant to kind of adjust colors so that they're easier to discern, like red from green. If red is weak, or if you have the blue yellow. So something to play around with there. I'm going to turn those off. And then finally, we're going to look at color themes. So if you want a really high contrast setup, we have some presets here. You adjust them from this menu under the contrast themes heading. And if you hit apply, it's going to change your entire theme to match with this preset. And if that doesn't totally work for you, if you want to edit those colors, you click the edit button here and you can manually adjust all of those colors to make your own custom high contrast theme. So that is pretty cool. Okay, those are all the basic settings. Most everything, again, is going to be in this settings window. We can adjust the scale under system. There's some color stuff to tweak in personalization, and then pretty much everything else lives under accessibility. There's a couple other settings that are not as obvious, and they are kind of hidden. It took me a while to learn about them. So the first one I want to show you is, let's look at, I'll bring a couple icons over so it's easier to see. If you want large icons on your desktop, there are several ways to do this. The way I have this in the document, the easiest way is if you hold Control Shift on your keyboard and then you press 1, that is the largest desktop icon size. So all of my icons just got really, really big. So if I hold Control Shift and I press 1, 2, 3, or 4, that will adjust my desktop icon sizes, with 4 being the smallest and 1 being the largest. You can also right click on your desktop, and if you go to View, it will show you the different icon size options, but the largest size isn't listed here. You can see it's also showing me the keyboard shortcut for this. So if you forget, you can kind of infer from this Control Shift 1 would be those extra large icons if you want those. All right, and then the last one is mouse settings. And this is, there's a couple of things you can turn on that makes your mouse easier to locate or track on your computer, but the settings are not in the most intuitive place. So I'm going to bring up our settings window again. Oops. And this time we're going to go under Bluetooth. And then we're going to go to mouse. And then finally, under mouse, we're going to go to additional mouse settings. And that will bring up a window that is buried in all my other windows. Here we go. All right. And in this mouse property windows, we want to look at pointer options. Mac and Chromebook also have something similar. It's not as hard to find on those devices, at least for this first option. Show location of pointer when you press the control key. So again, if your student's losing their pointer all the time, you can turn this on, and when you press control, it will draw a little circle around your mouse cursor. So finding that circle can be a little easier than trying to hunt around and look for your mouse as you're kind of jiggling it. Another thing that some people like is this display pointer trails. And as you move your mouse around the screen, it's going to have a little trail behind it. So that just kind of gives you a larger target to look for as you're hunting for your mouse cursor if you've lost it. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. So that is pretty much it for the settings. I guess I'll pause there for a moment in case anyone has questions, and then we're going to look at the magnifier and text-to-speech on Windows. You can unmute or you can drop it in the chat if you have a question. And if we don't have any questions, I'll just move on. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the magnifier. So the magnifier is listed under the accessibility settings. That's one way you can pull it up. You can also always turn on the magnifier by using the Windows key and plus, or Windows key and equals. Okay, so that brings up my little magnifier window. I don't think you all will be able to see my magnified view at all if I start increasing this. So I'm going to leave it at unmagnified. You can click on the little magnifier window here to adjust all of your settings. So if you want to zoom in or zoom out, you can do that here. These other two buttons next to the zoom in and zoom out are zoom all the way out and return to your last zoom level. The command for that is also Control Alt minus. Will let you quickly zoom in and out. So if you need to kind of jump out and get an overview of your screen really quick, Control Alt minus will zoom all the way out, and then you can press it again and it'll zoom back into where you were. Okay, there are the different views, and in our document, I've put in some of the shortcut keys for switching between all of those different views. They're specific ones, like Control Alt F. Am I right? Yeah, Control F is the full screen. Control Alt D for docked, Control Alt L for lens. You don't have to remember all of those. You can also use Control Alt M to just cycle through the options, or you can come into the accessibility settings and just pick your view from the list here. And for most people, you're probably not going to be jumping through all of those settings all the time. You're probably going to find one that you like working with, and you'll be working with that the majority of the time. Okay, there are some different magnifier settings that you might want to tweak, though. So I'm going to take a look at some of those. First, at the very top of our magnifier section in the accessibility settings, you can choose whether or not the magnifier starts right away when your computer starts. So that might be important for your students, important to know that that's there. Zoom level, we don't need to worry about. You're going to be adjusting this constantly. But the zoom increment might be something you want to play with. So this controls how much the zoom increases or decreases when you use those zoom in and out commands. So again, Windows plus for zoom in, Windows minus for zoom out. Just like you would in a browser, but you can use the Windows key instead of Control. So you can choose how far it zooms in and out. Under the views, you can choose a view here, and then this is a little tricky, but there's a little right arrow here, and you can get into some additional features for the view. And these are pretty important. You can control how the magnified view kind of follows your movement around the computer. So I think for a lot of our students, it's going to be mouse pointer and text cursor, having the magnified view follow those. So having it follow the text cursor when you're writing, and then otherwise it's following your mouse pointer. I do a little bit of keyboard access, so when I'm on web pages or something, I might tab around or use my keyboard to navigate to certain things. So you might want to have that turned on if you're using tab to navigate web pages, but for low vision users, you can probably turn this off for most students and just have it follow the mouse pointer. And then narrator cursor is the Windows screen reader narrator, so you most likely won't be using this. All right. Um, there is here under the keep the mouse pointer. This is a couple things that are a concept that's important to understand. So you have a couple options for where the mouse pointer is going to show up in your magnified view. And one option is to always have that mouse pointer centered on the screen. And when you do that, basically anytime you move your mouse, that whole magnified view is going to move along with your mouse always staying in the very center. So some people really like that. Other people might find that kind of disorienting. I think it takes some getting used to. The more kind of traditional one that I'm used to seeing is keeping the mouse within the edges of the screen. So the way that works is you'll have your magnified view and it kind of stays stationary until you move your mouse cursor up to the edges of that magnified view. And once you start hitting the edge of that magnified view, the magnifier is going to start moving in that direction. So it's not jumping around or moving around quite as much. It's not also not as responsive as if you had the cursor centered on the screen the entire time. So that's something you want to kind of understand the difference, spend some time with your student to see what works best for them. The same is true as the very same concept for this keep the text cursor. You can have it always center the text cursor on the screen so it's moving along as you're writing, or you can have it move that magnified view only when your text cursor hits the edges of that magnified view. So you can choose what works best for you. All of these same settings, I believe, are true for the docked view. Hold on, there we go, docked. Okay, so it's just showing us how it follows, what it's going to follow. And let's see if I do a keyboard focus and I move around, you can see it's jumping. Well, if you can see my magnified view, I'm not sure you all can. As I'm tabbing through the options here, the magnified view is following my keyboard focus because I checked that box. Okay. And then finally, um, in the lens options, you can adjust the size of your lens. So if you want your lens to be long and skinny, or if you want it to be a square, you can choose exactly how big your lens is as it's moving around the screen. All right. Um, there's a couple other general things to know about here. Smooth edges and images of text will help to try to keep those things more readable. Your mileage may vary on that. I had some kind of results were hit and miss with that, so see how that works for you. And then we already looked at inverting colors. Okay, that's the magnifier. That's a lot. How are we doing? Any questions about that before we start talking about text to speech? And text to speech should go pretty quickly.
Hey, Michael, this is Beth.
Yeah.
I was fumbling around with my magnifier as you were doing your thing, and I'm noticing a lot of pixelization.
hmm
Is there any way to clean that up, or is that just what you got to deal with?
Yeah, so that is something that you kind of have to deal with. That might be something where we might see that like Zoom text does that a little bit better. I'd be curious to do a side-by-side comparison. But I think a lot of that is what this smooth edges of images and text is meant to correct for.
Okay,
But when I was doing it, let's see if I turn it on. And again, I don't know if you all can see my magnified
I
view or
can,
not.
yeah.
You can. Okay. If I zoom in real close here, um, you can see some odd kind of pixelization around those characters, right? It's not super clean. But that magnified um, or that smooth edges is meant to clean that up a little bit so you don't get as much of that pixelization. But what I found, and it might just be when I'm here in the menus, is when I turn that off, I feel like it looks a little cleaner to me. So I don't know if the same will be true if I'm navigating on the internet and things. Presumably, they added this feature here for a reason.
Yeah. I have mine
So
on, and it's still really yuck, yucky.
yeah, I say I almost prefer it off, at least when I'm here looking in the menus. But play around with it, and of course it gets worse the higher your magnification level is.
Of course, and that's what the student needs,
Yeah.
right?
And that might be something I'm very curious about this now. I might go back and do a side-by-side comparison of how this works with Zoom text versus how it works with magnifier to see if
Right.
Zoom text cleans that up any better. The trade-off is with Zoom text, you need to have 16 gigs of RAM on your computer, which is a pretty robust computer and is not typically what our students are using.
Right. Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks for the question. Anyone else before we move on to text to speech? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. So, in Windows, the text to speech kind of works right alongside the magnifier, and let's find some text to read. What would it be? This tech page. All right. So there's a couple ways you can do this. I can click on some text and then hit the play button. It will start reading.
New screen reader courses. Learn every
Cool, really easy. I can also do, if I click there and hit Control Alt Enter,
new screen reader courses.
it starts playing.
Learn every
Control Alt Enter is also the same command to stop that speech. And then there's some commands for skipping ahead and back, but I haven't memorized those because I haven't been using them. I can also use Control Alt Enter and just click.
upcoming events are listed below. Would you
So I really like that. I think that's really handy and easy to use. You can also, if you go into the text-to-speech settings, you can change that modifier key. So Control Alt for all of these commands, Control Alt Enter, Control Alt Click, the ones to skip forward and back. You can change those to caps lock or insert if you want. You don't have to use Control Alt. So for all the keystrokes listed in the documentation here, I have you can swap those out with caps lock or insert if you go change it in the settings. Before we take a closer look at those settings, there's some simple settings you can change here in the magnifier window. So if I click on the gear icon, you can change how fast it reads and you can change the voice. But if you want to get deeper into your text-to-speech settings, there's a link to the settings here. And we can see under reading, here's our reading shortcut where we can change the caps lock or insert. And I think that might be it, actually. And then we're going to change the voice and the reading speed here from the magnifier toolbar. Okay, so fairly simple on text-to-speech. It gets a lot deeper on Mac, but it's fairly simple here on Windows. All right, I think that is actually it for Windows. How are we doing? Everybody's alive still? Any questions before we talk about Chromebook and Mac? Thumbs up, that's good. Everybody's still kicking. Great. Okay, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat if you want. Let's talk about Chromebooks. I'm going to go ahead and just bring up this document now since we're not looking at my Windows settings. So most of your Chromebook stuff is going to be adjusted in the Chromebook settings. I think the Chromebooks were one of the easier ones to set up. Um, Unlike Windows and Mac, Chromebook settings are all kind of located in the same area. We're not going to be jumping around a whole lot. If you click on the time on your MacBook, you'll find a link to the settings there. Or if you click on the launcher icon in the bottom left corner, you can search for settings, or you'll probably see a settings icon listed there too. So same kind of thing like we talked about with Windows. We're going to look at that display size. That's the same as that scaling we looked at on Windows under the display settings, or actually device display. And the cool thing about Chromebook is they also actually have a shortcut key for this. So Control Shift equals or Control Shift minus will zoom your whole display in and out. So as opposed to Windows, we had to go into the settings and adjust that scaling. You can do that on the fly on the Chromebook with that command, which is pretty cool. But you can also go into the settings and manually adjust it. They also have a thing called Nightlight. This will give you like a whole color overlay on your screen. It's meant to just block blue light, so it's just kind of like a rose colored overlay. So that's something I didn't find on Windows. Mac has something similar, but Mac will let you adjust the color you have as your overlay. You can adjust your wallpaper, like we did on Windows. They have the accessibility quick settings, which is pretty handy. This will give you a shortcut. If you click on your time again, you'll quickly turn off, on and off some of your accessibility settings. Text to speech we'll talk about later. Same kind of color correction options we saw before. They also have something about adjusting your website text font. And this is actually true for all of the Chrome browsers. You can go into, I believe it's appearance, and you can adjust the font size for everything on the web. But again, kind of pay close attention to how that's adjusting how things are displayed, because it can cause some issues. All right. Some other things that are kind of unique to Chromebook, highlighting items with keyboard focus. So as you move around the screen, it'll draw a big red box around the thing that the keyboard has focus on, and that can be really helpful. Highlighting cursor is just going to draw a circle around your text cursor. So Windows has those big indicators that sit on top. On Chromebook, it just draws a circle around your cursor. Large cursor we saw, color cursor we saw, and then highlight the cursor when you're moving. On Windows, we had the thing where if you press Control, it'll draw a circle around it. On Chromebook, it will just have a circle that always follows your mouse. So it's kind of always on, helping you track it when you move. All right. Chromebooks don't have a lens magnifier, so there's no kind of small magnifier that'll follow your cursor around. You only get a full screen magnifier or a docked magnifier. You can choose where to put that docked magnifier, but you don't have any lens option. Same kind of sort of movement options. Is it always actually they have one, I guess it's slightly different, which is where the magnification moves constantly but doesn't keep your mouse at the center. So it's really simple, excuse me. What's the word I'm looking for? It's really similar to keeping the mouse at the center. But even though it says continuously moves, I feel like this moves a little bit less than if you're keeping your mouse at the center at all times. There's a bit more wiggle room there. Same sort of things about following your keyboard focus or following when text is being read out loud. That's an important feature. And then following Chromevox focus. That can be helpful because of one of my favorite text-to-speech settings, which we're going to see in a minute. Same things under the docked magnifier. So on the Chromebooks, their main text-to-speech feature is called Select to Speak. And this actually requires you to select some text, and then there's a button you can click on the desktop, or you can use this command, the search S, which is basically caps lock S, and it will start reading the text that you've highlighted. So it works fine. I just find it kind of tedious to be constantly like selecting text and giving it a command and selecting text and giving it a command. I don't like that. The trade-off, I'm not entirely convinced is best. Chromevox has a really cool text-to-speech feature called Speak Text Under Mouse. So as you're moving your mouse around the screen, it will just read whatever is directly under your mouse. And so if you're a heavy text-to-speech user, I think that's worth turning on. But it's a little confusing because it is actually under Chromevox. You do actually have to turn Chromevox on. Okay. You can also select your voices there. Same for text to speech or the select to speak. These voices are independent of each other. So you'll have a different voice for Chromebox or a different voice for the speak selection, depending on what your settings are. All right. And then I'm getting some text still, but I think we're good. All right. We made it all the way to Mac. We've got 10 minutes left. I think we'll make it. Again, a lot of this stuff is similar. If I jump down to the display setting, we'll see lots of things we saw already, like invert colors, increase contrast, reduce transparency is especially important on Mac because They went really hard on making everything transparent. So again, if you want high contrast, you're going to want to turn that off. Lots of similar stuff here. Adjusting the size of icons is a little trickier on Mac. They have that in several different places. So like menu bar size, text size. We'll see dock size later and text size related to that and text and dock and size in your Finder. So that's a little trickier here, but generally things are the same. Hover text is unique to Mac. So the way this works is there are two kind of options here. Hover typing. Anytime you're typing, a window will appear with an enlarged view of whatever you're writing. And you can get that at your preferred font size in your preferred colors. So that's pretty cool. Hover text is really similar. It will just do it for anything you're reading, anything that's under your mouse cursor. If you hold the command key, it'll show up in that big window in your preferred font size, in your preferred colors. You can tweak all that stuff, so it's pretty cool. The trick to keep in mind for a lot of these Mac settings when you're tweaking them is you need to look for that little information circle because they hide a lot of important options in there. Okay, a lot of this stuff is the same. Mac doesn't do that circle around the cursor, but they do a shake mouse pointer to locate, and I think that will do kind of like a circle to help you find it. Same sort of like color blindness and inversion options. There's an option for audio descriptions if they're available. All right, a lot of this stuff is very similar to what we saw before, so I'm going to skip all the way down to desktop options. If you want to make them extra large, you have to right click on the desktop and you can follow the directions here. Similar in Finder. Finder, you have to open a Finder window and then go to your app settings at the top of the screen, and then you can adjust those. So those are a little funny. And then that brings us all the way to Zoom. So Zoom is what Mac calls their magnifier, has a lot of the same features we talked about before, but I think these kind of options for turning the magnifier off and on is kind of cool. So there is a three key shortcut to turn it off and on. That's not my favorite. It's like Control Options 8 will turn on the magnifier. But instead, you can also use the three finger double tap like we do on iPad. That will turn Zoom off and on. Or you can hold down Control and just scroll on your mouse or on your trackpad with like the two finger scroll, like you're scrolling up and down a web page, and that will turn Zoom off and on. So that one's pretty slick. In particular, I think this scroll gesture with modifier key is pretty cool. And you can adjust the modifier keys if you want. Same sort of options. Mac's a little bit better at giving you some flexibility for where you position your dock, and sizing your lens, that kind of stuff. And anything else super important here? On all of this, there's a smooth images there, like we talked about with Beth's computer. But I think all of this is pretty similar to what we saw before. Okay. Spoken content, again, also works pretty similarly. There's a lot of like select text and have it read back. But Mac also has a speak item under pointer. So that's my favorite type of text-to-speech, where you just put your mouse somewhere and it reads out. So happy to see that here on a Mac. And all right, I think we made it all the way to the end. There is also a typing echo if you want to do that. And then at the end here, there are shortcuts for all the Mac tools. So we went through that very fast. If you look at each of the sections at the end of the Windows and the Chromebook and the Mac sections, there's a list of the key commands specifically for the tools, the magnification of the text-to-speech. And at the very end here, if you want to do a deeper dive, you can see a lot of the documents and videos I referenced as I was putting this together. All right. That's a long one. There's a whole lot here. I don't expect anyone to remember the details of this, but I think if you can remember broad strokes of kind of generally what's available here, and remember that this document is available, you can pull it up the next time you're doing a low vision setup, and hopefully it'll make the process a little easier so you don't have to search all around the web for how do I find all these different settings, what settings are available. where exactly are they in the different settings areas. Hopefully this makes it all a bit more streamlined and less confusing. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can chat for a bit and move on with our day. And where's the thing I'm looking for? There we go. Stop recording.